you do residential, that these tanks are non-regulated according to the state of North Carolina. So in other words, there's no regulation on them as long as nobody's trying to sell the house. The state's never going to send the homeowner a letter. They're never going to pull up in the driveway and say, empty the tank, remove the tank, test the tank. There's no regulation whatsoever on these. So the first time it becomes an issue is when the house goes on the market. So luckily for you guys, that's right when you're in the middle of the mess. What normally happens on these things, I'm sure you've been aware if you've worked either of both sides, most of the time the buyer's agent, or particularly the lender is going to require to see if the tank has a leak. They're normally going to want some kind of soil inspection done to see if there's any leakage from the tank. That's normally what starts the process. And then as Tom and I were just discussing, there's very few of these things we're going to find that are going to be clean. Almost, we're finding 80-90% of them have a leak. The reason for that is these tanks were put in probably back in the 60s, 70s, maybe most recently in the 80s. They just were not designed to last 50 years in the ground. I mean, most of them are well beyond their life expectancy. We're often pulling them out with, holes big enough you can put your fist through. So, we've got a lot of them out there that don't have some kind of leakage from the tank. Normally what happens at that point is once the leakage is found, and of course the seller at that point, becomes liable for whatever's found, and they have to deal with the state to get that cleared. And that's basically the part that our company becomes most involved in, doing the consultant part on getting these things cleared. I don't know how many of you are aware, how long most of you have been in the business, but prior to 2015, the state of North Carolina had a trust fund that actually paid for the cleanup and assessment of contamination. I don't know if you were involved in that. As of October 2015, they basically eliminated the fund. So there is no more money to assist with that. If you haven't had one of these situations since then, the rules have drastically changed. Basically now there is no cleanup, no assessment required for a leaking home heating oil tank unless the site is served by supply well. The site's on public water, basically a site in the middle of the city limits with municipal water supplies. They don't require you to do any cleanup. They don't require you to do any further assessment. There's just the paperwork that has to be filed. The state basically gives what's called a notice of no further action, which is a letter that everybody is after once this is detected as a problem. So I'll go into a little bit further in a few minutes about what happens if there is a well involved. But basically, as long as you have no supply well within 150 feet of that leaking tank, there's only really two actions that have to be conducted to get a no further action letter. The first of those is the tank has to be stopped from leaking. So you can accomplish that by either filling the tank in place or removing it from the ground. So basically, you're going to render where it's no longer going to leak beyond that point once you detect the leak has happened. The other thing that has to be done is what's called a notice of residual petroleum. It has to be prepared and filed with the Register of Deeds. That is basically what the state considers a deed restriction. And they're going to put restrictions on the property as far as they're going to stipulate where the contaminated soil is located in relation to the house. They're going to stipulate that contaminated soil cannot be disturbed or removed unless it's going to be properly excavated and disposed. And they also stipulate that you can never put a drinking water well on the property for any purpose. So in other words, I shouldn't say drinking well, you can't put a well on the property for any purpose, irrigation included. So that would basically put you in the category that you don't want, where you're no longer, municipal water only. The site has to remain served by the public water if you never have a well anywhere on the property. So once those things are done, that enables the state to issue the no further action letter that, the lenders, the buyers, everybody's after at that point as a release of liability. So the documents that I just passed around, these are both kind of dated, and I'm going to talk to you some things that have changed on these. The first one that's got the little North Carolina Department of Environment and Natural Resources heading at the top. Obviously this one's very dated because North Carolina DENR doesn't even exist anymore. They're now North Carolina DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality. Same people, same group, all that, but they just changed their name. This is basically a description of what the state recommends. This is more or less something they put out for buyers and buyers' agents, stipulating that the tanks need to be tested as part of a real estate transaction, and kind of goes through the process of how they recommend the tank to be tested. In other words, this is explaining that the sample needs to be taken below the bottom of the tank, no more than 2 feet in native soil. They're not wanting to sample around the fill pipe and see if something's been spilled. They want to know if the tank's truly leaking. It talks about the proper methods to use. And this is basically the procedure that we would follow if we got a call from a buyer or a buyer's agent to go out and do an initial soil inspection. What our company typically does, It goes out and does 1 or 2 hand augers. Basically, we will find the edges of the tank, bore down on each end of the tank or on both sides, depending on how it's oriented in relation to the house. Collect a couple of soil samples from beneath the tank. We're going to measure the tank bottom by sticking the tank, seeing how deep it is. We're going to go 18 inches to 2 feet below the bottom of the tank. That's typically 5 to 8 feet in the ground, depending on the tank size and how deep it's buried. So we're not sampling it, 1 foot deep beside the fill pipe on top of the tank. We're actually getting down beneath the bottom of the tank to see if there's truly leakage from underneath. That's the proper way to sample. That's basically what this letter is explaining, the procedure that should be followed. The second brochure, or this is actually a brochure that's not folded up for you guys. This is something that Guilford County puts out. I don't know if all of you are aware, but Guilford County Environmental Health actually regulates their own tanks. They're the only county in the state of North Carolina that regulates their own tanks. So basically they act as the agent for North Carolina DEQ, formerly DENR, and works on their behalf, but they handle the tanks in Guilford County just like if they were representing the state. So this is a brochure they put out that talks about a lot of this, and it talks about there being no regulations on the tank, what you do when the tank is no longer being used. It basically goes through the different scenarios, but then again, when you flip over on the back, you're going to see the very last section. How am I going to pay for this? That's with the fund being eliminated, that section no longer applies. There's no assistance whatsoever as far as the trust fund. So that's basically why that's crossed out. And there's also a sentence in this initial letter as well that's crossed out that talks about the financial assistance being available. That no longer is possible in North Carolina. The main reason they have peeled back or scaled back on the regulations once contamination is discovered is because of the elimination of the fund. The state basically said, we were paying for all this. We could ask for, extensive soil excavation. We could ask for groundwater assessment, all this kind of thing, because they were basically footing the bill. So in 2015, we didn't know how they were going to deal with that, but basically they said if we no longer can pay, we're not going to be able to require homeowners to do this. So that was the reason for, completely repealing most of the regulations and no longer requiring any cleanup on these tanks. So that basically clear as far as what you do if we find a release now from the tank and there's no well involved. Basically you're going to stop the release, you're either going to remove the tank or fill the tank in place. Either of those are acceptable options to the state. I will tell you, most people are under the misassumption that filling the tank in place is probably cheaper. That's actually not the case. It's normally more expensive to fill it in place because it's much more labor intensive. So when people find that out, most people opt to go ahead and remove the tank unless there's something keeping you from doing that, unless the large AC unit or a deck's been built on top of the tank or the driveway's over the tank. Some reason you can't easily dig it out and dispose of it. Those are the ones we normally fill in place. And that's just here again a cost issue. The typical cost to actually remove a tank that's just easily accessible, maybe it's just out in the center of the backyard, not underneath any kind of structure, just under grass or landscaping, you're probably looking at $1,600 to $2,000 to get that tank removed. The same tank to fill it in place, probably going to be looking at well over $2,000, normally $2,200 to $2,400 to do that. The reason for the increased cost, people always ask this, they don't understand why it's more expensive. But basically, when you fill a tank properly, what you're doing is you're hand digging down to the tank. You're cutting the tank open so that you can completely vacuum it out, pressure wash it out, get all the oil and sludge and residue out. So basically, you're doing all that with the tank in the ground. You're going to have somebody halfway in the tank, scraping out the sludge, pressure washing, vacuuming it out. By the time you do all that and get the tank completely clean, you're ready to put the fill material in. You probably spent more time on site than if you dug it out. They would have already had the tank probably out on the truck and be driving away. So it's just much more labor intensive to fill one in place. So normally you don't want to go with that option for the purpose of cost, and, unless the tank just can't be feasibly removed. So, but those are the two options you would have to stop the release of the tank. The state will require that the tank no longer be leaking once it's detected to have leaked. They don't want to close out the site with a no further action letter, knowing that a month from now the site's going to be worse than it was at that point. They want to know they've completely stopped it. It's only going to get better at that point. The other thing that's required to get that no further action letter is filling out the paperwork that you're going to file with the Register of Deeds, and that's what's called a Notice of Residual Petroleum. I have a sample of one of these here. I didn't make 25 copies of it. I didn't know how interested everybody would be to see it. Some of you have probably gone through it and seen those yourself that your clients have had to sign if you've been on the seller's side. Basically what that does is that's the state's loophole for closing out a site. It's not technically clean. Basically what they're saying is, we've acknowledged that it's contaminated, We've stipulated that we don't let contamination disturb. We don't want anybody drinking the groundwater on this site. And we've also made that public record by filing with the register of deeds so future buyers can't come along and say, we didn't know we bought contaminated property. We didn't know we were looking at a piece of contaminated property. The state's going to say, well, yes, you did if you did a title search. So that's kind of their theory on the rationale for that. The other thing that, if you think about it, kind of makes a little bit of sense as far as them repealing all the regulations is we were actually doing cleanup on these things. Probably less than half the sites were actually cleaning up, even though the state was footing the bill for the most of it, and it was required to clean up. Normally these tanks are within 2 or 3 feet of the foundation of the house. So even though you pull the tank out and you may make the attempt to dig out some contaminated soil, most of the time we were not able to get all the contamination out because it went underneath the footer of the house. So when it was said and done, we might dig out, 30 or 40 tons, and here I'm talking about something that was, 5 years ago under the old rules, but the state was finding out that even though they were making the attempt to clean it up, they weren't able to get all the contaminated soil out. So if the site's still contaminated, their only option was to file this deed restriction, basically say, okay, it's as clean as we can get it, don't disturb it any further, leave that contamination alone, don't install a well, and we're going to go and close everything out. So they basically took that rationale of they were paying to clean up sites that weren't cleaning up, and just basically said if there's not a well involved, nobody's health at risk, we're just going to close the site immediately by stopping the release, filing the paperwork, and shipping all the steps between A and Z. That was kind of their rationale of doing that. But here again, we kind of found out that all the sites we were doing for years and years and years, it wasn't near as necessary as they thought at the time. So, how many of you dealt with this before? Have you been through it? I'll tell you, if you're on the buyer's side, be wary of these things. Look for them. Houses that were built probably in the mid-'70s and before probably had oil heat at one time. That's not to say they had an underground tank. They could have had an above-ground tank, but that's kind of the age to watch out for. Definitely be aware of the signs. I mean, if you don't see the fill and vent pipe sticking up in the yard, definitely ask the home inspector to be sure to look. Have them be aware and look for the copper lines in the crawl space. I mean, that's the real red flag, telltale sign. The lines you see that would have gone from the furnace to the tank, normally those lines are not taken out. I mean, the furnace has gone from the basement, the tank may be gone, or the pipes may be cut off from the tank outside. Normally you'll see the copper lines in the crawl space, in the basement. I don't know, Tom, do you know for sure if the home inspectors are supposed to note that in their report? I've had some tell me yes and some tell me no.
Most of them will if they see it. And the thing is, guys, if the inspector sees that there was at some point an oil furnace and the seller says, well, I don't know about an oil tank or I don't know, you can get his guys out there with metal detectors and they can see if they can locate a tank. Because it's better to find it on the buying end than when you sell it to them and then 5 years down the road you go to resell it and I'm the agent working for the buyer and we discover it then, and then your buyer in the beginning, because you didn't get them out there, has now got to deal with the buried oil tank.
What were the ranges of the prices from filling it to moving it? I mean, you said $2,400, but filling it.
A good range to remove them, and this is basically just a basic site where the tank is completely exposed, just under grass and landscaping, fairly accessible. It's probably about $1,600 to $2,000 to remove, probably $2,000 to $2,400 to fill in place. And I've got some brochures from the contractor that we use for that if you guys are interested. I mean, anytime you're dealing with this, we normally just let our agents go direct with those people and deal with them as far as pricing the removal and paying for it, so we're not having to mark that up for your clients. I can leave you brochures if you guys are interested in them, but I mean, most of the time with agents, we normally just arrange to get the pricing from the contractor, arrange them to go out and do the work, and then kind of turn it over to you guys as far as them billing you directly on that. So you don't necessarily need to call them directly, but I do have some information so you'll know who we're using. This is a company out of Julian. They kind of specialize in smaller residential type jobs, and they've been doing all of our residential work for about 10 years. So it's really the only people we use on the residential side. But like Tom said, I mean, you really want to find this thing, before your buyer becomes a seller. I mean, that's the thing. The buyer is probably incurring, cost of $200-300 to do an inspection and find the contamination. The seller is probably going to be facing a charge of closer to $3,000 to get everything, resolved with the paperwork and that kind of thing, assuming there's no well in the picture, and all they have to do is remove the tank and file the paperwork. Not only do you have to file that document with the Register of Deeds, there's also some other form work the state requires, some notification forms that have to be sent in to kind of stipulate who the responsible party is. That's something else we take care of. The consultant is also supposed to be out and oversee the removal or the filling of the tank. The reason for that is because once contamination is involved, the state says, you're supposed to have the licensed professional involved in all phases of the work from there, just to certify that it's being done properly. The contractor doesn't have to have a license, but basically a professional kind of overseeing and certifying their work. And there's also some certified letters that have to be sent out. Any of you have been through this, probably heard about this as well. But once you get the no further action letter, that's actually a two-part letter. You get what's called a conditional no further action letter, which stipulates two conditions. One, that you record the notice of residual petroleum with the Register of Deeds. That's normally done by the time we even get the letter in most cases. The other condition is that you forward a copy of that conditional no further action letter to all the adjacent property owners, the mayor, and the health director. That's just another, bit of red tape the state requires. That's something else that we would handle, sending those letters and then, verifying the return receipt, providing all that documentation to the state. And once those two conditions are satisfied, then you get basically final no further action letter. It's essentially the same letter you had that they've removed the conditional status. So that's kind of how the process works. The state actually says in their regulations that the property cannot be legally sold or transferred to another party until the notice is recorded with the Register of Deeds. So that's normally the part that we have to make sure is done before the property closes. The other things, the lender may require the no further action letter. They may be fine with knowing that's coming, but that's not a requirement as far as the state of North Carolina. They just want it documented that the site is contaminated before it's transferred. Here again, so nobody can come back and say, we didn't know what we were buying. We had no knowledge of this. Even though we've had people try to say that before, and they were the actual ones that did the initial soil test. So they might be aware, but if they say they don't, who's to say? I don't know how many of you deal with a lot of properties around the county and are on wells. I don't know where to start on that situation. That's kind of a whole other ball game. If you've got a supply well within 150 feet of the tank and it's leaking, your options are very limited. At that point, it's basically like it was prior to 2015 for all sites. You've got the option to either clean up the contamination completely, get all of it out, not most, but get all of it out, have the site completely clean to get that no further action letter. Or your other option, and the one that most people pursue if it's possible, is just to move the well. Just relocate the well outside 150 feet. Now, you can already picture, how many properties you're dealing with. You've got a half-acre property, you don't have 150 feet in any direction. We've seen people get creative, get an easement from their neighbor, hook onto their neighbor's well, do anything they can to get rid of their well if it's within 150 feet, because that, to be honest, is the easier option out of the problem. Like I said before, most of these sites you will not clean up, no matter how much money you're going to throw at it, no matter how much digging you're going to do. You can't dig out the contaminated soil that's underneath the footer of the house. We can't jeopardize the structure to try to dig out contamination. So if you can't clean it up and you can't move the well, that site basically will not qualify for a no further action letter.
So if someone was to take the easy route and sponsor their well, wouldn't you have to, by Brooklyn County regulations, to then the well doesn't have to come and all that? That's what's not.
They would. Any well within 150 feet of a leaking tank has to be properly abandoned. So yes, you did. The Youngstown County Department of Health is already involved because of the tank issue, but it's another whole department with their well inspections. You get them involved and fill the wells. That's something else that our company takes care of. We've got licensed well contractors on staff, and we can handle that as well. But that's normally the way to go. If there's any way to move the well, if there's any way to connect to a neighboring well, a well that's outside 150 feet, that's going to be your more surefire option of getting a no further action letter. Because we've had some sites that have gambled and said, well, we just don't see that as an option. We're going to make an attempt to try to clean up the contamination, and your odds on that are not good. And there are some that clean up, but that's not a guaranteed solution. You may go in there and dig 30 or 40 tons of contaminated soil, get 80-90% of it out, but if it's not clean, everything to the state's either it's clean or dirty. So if it's still dirty, you really haven't accomplished anything. They probably spent $6-8 grand at that point digging soil, doing samples, and that kind of thing. So.
Tell them how many dump trucks is 30 to 40 tons.
It's not near as much as you think it is. 30 tons is probably only 2 tandem loads. So, I mean, people hear, 40 tons of contaminated soil and they're picturing, you dug up my whole yard, you hauled away all the, soil off the entire property. I mean, that's a typical, residential cleanup, probably, hole that's 8 by 10 by 12 or 14 feet deep. It's not the size hole you think to get to that kind of tonnage.
Where do they take the container? Where they use the containers?
Most of it from this area is what they call land farm. It's taken to a permitted facility. There's actually one in Thomasville now, but that one's only been there for a year, but most of it goes to either Mebane or Sanford. And they basically have just a permitted field or area to spread it. And they keep it tilled, they keep it treated. Once it's exposed to the sun and the oxygen, and it cleans up very quickly on top of the ground. But when it's down in the ground, it's not getting the sunlight, it's not getting the oxygen to it. It's going to take decades to clean up on its own, like that. That's what most of it from here is done. There's a place over in Winston that actually treats it by some kind of steam process that's supposed to clean it up sooner, quicker. So, I mean, there's other options, but most of it here, as far as for the cost, is just land farming. Yes, ma'am.
This is a little off the subject, but I remember years ago reading in the paper that one of the oil companies went to the wrong house and filled a basement with oil. How did they clean that up and what happened?
Well, I mean, that's not an isolated case either. I mean, I've heard that more than once, but what normally happens with that is when you had a tank that was in a crawl space, I guess I probably ought to address this too with tanks that are underneath additions to the house, but that's probably what happened. The tank was under the house, the fill and vent pipes were stubbed out through the foundation and it turned up where they could fill the tank. For some reason they had removed the tank was no longer under there, so I guess those pipes went to nothing, but nobody saw fit to seal them off or remove them from the wall, and I guess the oil company went to the wrong house. They came out and stuck the fill pipe or stuck the fill spout in that thing. Instead of filling it into a tank, they filled it into the crawl space. So I have no idea. I mean, I guess a lot of hand digging under the house to try to clean it up. So,
This wasn't in a crawl space.
I mean, I've heard stories, more than one of those. Luckily, I've never been the consultant on that job, thank goodness, but I have no idea what happened with that. I know we've had tanks that have leaked in basements and crawl spaces, that kind of thing, and even just normal leakage where you're probably only losing, a couple of gallons, a year or whatever. I mean, that takes a lot of digging when you're talking about working within the confines of the structure. So I can't imagine what they finally did to that. I can't believe that they ever truly got it clean. They probably just got it mitigated enough that the house was livable again, which I don't even see how that happened.
If y'all have never smelled the fuel, it stinks. If you get it on your hand, you can't wash your hand 2-3 times and it's gone. It's there. It stinks.
But yeah, you have some people that have grown up with oil heat and they swear by it and they won't have anything else. So I mean, there's people still, that's the heat. They say they're going to be cold if they have any other kind of heat. So there's some sold on it. But
What's the biggest underground tank you've been involved with, gallon-wise?
I mean, service station tanks can be 20,000 gallons. We did pull one at a house in Sedgefield. I don't know, I guess this guy was preparing for World War III. He had a 10,000 gallon fuel tank at his house in Sedgefield. It was a big house, but it wasn't, if a 3,000 square foot house can get by on 500 gallons, he didn't have a house big enough to justify 2,000. So I don't know what he thought he was ready for, but that's very, very, very rare.
Talk to them about people saying, oh, we filled it with sand.
And I don't know if you've heard that one. We get that one about once a month. But yeah, I mean, there was a big misconception a long time ago that all you need to do is fill it with sand and you never have to deal with it again. That's acceptable. That's all that's required. That's true to an extent if you fill it properly. If you go out and dump some place sand down the fill pipe, I don't know what you hope to accomplish. I mean, when you fill a tank, the filling is really secondary to the fact that you clean the tank out. Basically, at that point, if the tank hasn't leaked and I go fill it today, I want to make sure it's not going to leak, next week. So you need, like we said, you need to dig down to the tank. You need to cut it open. You've got to clean out all that material inside. You don't want to leave oil and sludge in there underneath the sand or fill material, so that when the tank finally rusts through, that it's going to begin to leak at that point. So, not only can you not fill one with sand and do it in a way that's doing you any good, you're trying to do it, get your handyman to do that with the play sand from Lowe's. If you didn't clean out the tank, you didn't accomplish anything, but at the same time, there's no way you're gonna completely fill the void of that tank by filling it through the fill pipe. So, our big telltale sign is people tell us all the time, well, that tank's been filled with sand, they did that years ago when they took it out of service. If we go out and see the fill and vent pipe still sticking up, they didn't fill it properly. We can dig down that tank, cut it open, we might find some sand in the bottom. I've had them tell us before that it was filled with sand. There's probably not enough sand to fill a 55-gallon drum, and they consider that 500-gallon tank filled. So, they poured some sand down it, but that's not filled. You're not gonna fill the void of the tank from end to end, trying to fill it through a 2-inch fill pipe. But the real issue with whether or not you filled it completely or not, the real issue with that is, did you clean the tank out? If you're filling it with anything, no matter what you're putting into it, if the tank is not clean, if there's still oil and liquid in there, the tank can still leak. And we've seen plenty of them that have been filled. Maybe they were somewhat filled properly, there's a lot of material in there, but if there's still oil in there, the tank's still leaking, and that's what the state's, that's what they want to see when one's filled, is they want to see that the tank's no longer leaking.
So when you say to fill the tank as an option, what do you mean with it?
You really can fill it with anything. We just recommend something solid to support the weight of the tank. But if it's getting weak enough where it's, you've got dozens of holes rusted in the bottom, eventually the top's going to rust. You don't want a sinkhole in the yard. So we fill it with sand, gravel, clay soil. Flowable fill concrete is what we use most of the time when the tank's inaccessible. Sometimes you have to pump that material through the tank to get it filled. You just want to fill it with something solid. So if the tank finally rusts and deteriorates to the point that there's no structural strength, you don't have a hole in the yard. You don't have somebody, mowing the backyard and all of a sudden the lawnmower's half in the tank. So, you want something that's going to support that weight. Some of them are very close to the driveway. You don't want to take a chance with somebody driving off into the edge of the tank. So.
I would say that I would have input Brandon's number in your phone. You will need it at some point. I promise I've only been in real estate for a couple months. I've ran across old tanks twice. One of which Brandon had to get heavily involved in. And I will tell you, without Brandon and his knowledge, that deal would not have went through. It's actually a very small miracle that it happened. Brandon took care of all the paperwork. I literally still am humble at how fast he worked. You would think I was his only client. Dead serious. He called the sellers, the buyers. He did everything for me. I literally think he had a job, maybe even Raleigh, to get a paper to get it done in time. So he would go above and beyond for you to answer all your questions and make sure your client truly understands what's going on. And I had no idea that it could get this extensive, but it's actually a really big deal. And but I do have questions, actually. So I know that a rider goes on the deed of the house. So sometimes that can affect, when somebody looks when you pull that. So if we look up on, we pull it for a seller or buyer, and it should be on that deed, right? Okay.
It's supposed to show up in the title search. That's the way the state designed this document to be, and that's why it's recorded with the register thing. So it's working properly.
What year was the no further action letter started?
Don't quote me exactly, but I think 2003.
Okay. The reason I asked that is because there was another house, I want to say it was in the 70s, and I guess it was a material fact sheet, and it said something for Whitmore residential property closures and something about abandoned UST tanks. And at that point in time, I had no idea what a UST tank was. I had to research it, and they had no further knowledge on it. The people that owned it, that they'd owned it for 10 years, the people before them had told them that they had been sealed off. So where or how would I have found
What that probably means that people from several deals back were aware that the tank was there, but it was probably never tested and never dealt with. So that, until the state gets involved, until you detect contamination from one of these, and the state will tell you, we have people call all the time and they say, we're looking at this property, the state doesn't have anything on record. That doesn't mean that the tank there hasn't leaked. That just means nobody's checked it yet. They just haven't looked for it and found it. Because once contamination is detected, you terminate it to the state. That's when they're going to require that the deed restriction be filed. Basically, they're going to say, if you want to sell the property, you're going to have to file the deed restriction. Or if you want to request a no further action letter, you're going to have to file the deed restriction. Either of those two actions, which in most times, most of the cases involving you guys, is going to be both. That you need a no further action letter and you want to sell the house. But either of those would trigger the deed recordation having to be filed. And that's where you're going to find the record of it with the state. So.
Is there a place to look up still tanks, like, or anything like that?
You talking about a tank that's not really been tested?
It's like abandoned, and they're like,
Here again, the tanks are non-regulated, there's no database, there's no record of, all the houses that have them. It almost falls upon you guys, unfortunately. I mean, the knowledge of the age of the house, if the neighbors, had old heat at one time, that one probably did. If the house is of the age to have it, probably did. If you see evidence of an old oil furnace, maybe the tank's gone, maybe the copper lines are gone, but if it was an oil furnace, obviously they had something to store that oil. I mean, that's kind of what to look for these things, that there's with the tank being non-regulated, people don't have to register or contact the state and say we're going to bury a tank, or we have a buried tank, and nobody really cares until you get a real estate transaction.
so that's the bottom line, get an inspection on it. And so what other things can like the soil contamination cause? I mean,
It's not really a health risk. It never was. Even when the state had the fund to clean them up, I mean, that's the sad thing to have to admit to people, but I mean, that's the truth. The state said that, their regulations said if you found contamination, you had to try to clean it up, but I mean, the fact is, that contamination is 4, 5, 6 feet in the ground. It's capped by clean soil above that depth. People have been living on it, playing in the backyard, growing shrubs on top of the tank for all this time, and it's not hurting anything. It's a site on public water. Now, if you've got a well, and that's their reasoning for making stricter requirements of a well. I mean, if you've got a supply well, 50 feet from that tank, and the tank's leaking bad enough, it could impact the well. That's a health issue. But I mean, a house, down the road here that's on public water, it's not a health risk at all. It's a risk because a lender might be concerned that there's leakage there, and the issue hasn't been cleared. That's what's driving the issue. That's why it comes up only when you guys get involved, and nobody's gonna think a thing about it until somebody else wants to buy the property. We get people tell us all the time, well, the tank's not regulated, I don't have to do anything. Well, I mean, you don't if you want to own the property forever. But if you want to sell it, it's like anything else with the house. If there's something wrong with the house, and somebody's going to ask you to fix it before they're willing to take it. Yes, ma'am.
I actually have a question for Tom. Tom, you want to address, if you're the legal person in here, what we do if we've gone all the way through our due diligence period, and then the attorney finds us on a title search. And, do we legally have to notify the lender of that, or what if the buyer wants to buy it, or if the buyer does not want to buy it, if it was the first time understand?
Well, your title search should be done during the due diligence time period, so you need to leave enough time to get that done and work with the attorney that they can find this out during due diligence. If it's outside of due diligence, it's really a material fact, so this seller should have put it on the seller's disclosure, and you'd have a sticky situation then. So it's best to find it out during the due diligence and get the attorney to do the title search up front. Yeah. Did that answer it? Okay.
Are there any other questions? I know I went through an awful lot of information pretty quickly.
Just to confirm, you said there is no environmental dangers other than something falling, collapsing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's going to get more of a structural issue with the tank actually collapsing. And that's uncommon. I mean, I'm not saying that's never happened, but I mean, that's your reason you want to put something solid in the tank. But I mean, that's not be the biggest concern from the tank. But as far as a health issue, I mean, no.
Unless you got a well.
Correct.
Right. So then, Tom, a seller and a buyer could negotiate that it stays there. It just has to be. It doesn't have to be filled or removed. Is that correct?
Yeah, it doesn't have to, but at some point somebody's going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, if you've got a buyer, I mean, the buyer's going to want a release of liability. They're not going to buy that property and also be buying the responsibility for the tank and the contamination. So that's normally why the buyer does the inspection, finds the problem, and they want the seller to provide them with no further action letter saying that, they're not buying any liability for the tank. So in order to get that no further action letter, you're going to have to remove or fill the tank. Yeah, that's going to take care of that part. You're also going to file the deed recordation with the register of deeds. So, assuming your seller, wants that no further action letter, then yes, that action will have to be taken. Anything else?
They'll think about 20 of them after you leave.
I think I've passed cards around. If you need anything, you can email me, call me. We'll be glad to go out and look at these sites. If you got one where you think that, the age may be right, suspect, we might have a tank, call us. We'll go out and check it out and see what we can find. And we're not always going to be able to find the tank, even if it's there, but we've got some utility locators like Tom mentioned. We've got a company we use that goes out. They not only have the metal detectors, that kind of thing, they've got ground penetrating radar, they've got any kind of equipment you can think of to look in the ground to find things that are buried. I mean, we've had them find before where the tank's gone, but they find the excavation where the tank used to be. They can see the difference in the backfill versus the native soil, and I mean, we know the proper size. If it matches the proper size of where a tank would be, that's still suspect. And we've sampled a lot of sites, and the tanks are gone, but the contamination's still there. It was never detected. I mean, that's the same situation. So just be careful if you're dealing with a house of that age where it could have had a tank. Don't let your buyer buy the house and then come to find out when he's the seller, that's when it's discovered, because I guarantee you're going to get a call from him. You represented me, and I shouldn't have bought this, nobody told me.
How much does that usually cost for you guys to go out there to just see if there is a tank?
Basically, just to do a visit or an inspection is normally $100 to $150, depending on the time involved. That normally would include us collecting a sample if we find a tank and also analyzing the sample in the lab. So, this is the basic inspection.
And time frame to resolve the issue, either removing the tank or filling?
Normally, to get it on the schedule to remove or fill, we're probably talking about a week to 2 weeks. The contractor's normally backed up that much, and the paperwork to get the no further action letter can be proceeding at the same time. That normally takes a week to 2 weeks. So, and they don't have, they're independent of each other. They can, they can be removing the tank next week. Well, at the same time, we can be working on getting the seller to sign the paperwork, get the state to approve it, get it recorded, and that's where April was mentioned, and that's basically what our company's going to be working on, while they're getting arranged to do the thing. We'll get that stuff shuttled back and forth between the people. We normally do that by hand delivery, just so we keep it in our possession. The state doesn't lose it or throw it on somebody's desk and not know where it's at. But here again, that's another advantage working in Guilford County, because we work so closely with those regulators that they do all the tanks in Guilford County. We work closely with them, so they're pretty good about saying, all right, the person needs to sign this, is coming to our office this week, drop it off, we'll have it ready for you. I've got one to pick up on Monday and pick up and record. So I mean, we work with them enough that they're fine to call and say, this thing's signed, come by and pick it up and go record it. So.
Is it Allison Best that's with Guilford County for the tanks?
Sharon Sheehack.
Sharon Sheehack, okay.
Yeah,
if you got a question, if a site's ever been closed out or anything done, Sharon Sheehack, and I've got her number.
Her number's on the back
of
the
good.
brochure. That large number will get you to the operator, can get you to Sharon.
What's her name, Sharon? What?
Her last name is spelled C-I-H-A-K, but it's pronounced she, like S-H-E-H-A-K. Sheehack. Yeah, C-I-H-A-K.
Okay.
Pronounced Sheehack. Yeah, she's great to talk to, but she's got access to the database. She can look up an address and tell you, hey, there was a release there, but it was clear there was no further action letter issued, 2006. She still have that stuff on file. I don't want to promise what she's going to do, but normally she's pretty good about, she'll pull that letter and send it to you if you need it. But, unfortunately, most of these ones you're going to call them probably haven't been dealt with. She's going to say, well, I don't have anything at that address, so, tank's probably never been inspected. Yeah.
Can you go over maybe what you charge for an inspection and then what you charge? Is there different prices? You charge to go out and try to find if there was one there?
What we normally do, if we go to do an inspection or there's no evidence of the tank, we still suspect one. We normally, like we do with our contractor removal, we normally just get you guys in touch with our locator and let you go direct with them. But they're normally like $100 an hour, and they're not going to be at a residential site, even 2 hours. So they normally charging, $100 to $150 to come out and use all their equipment. They'll normally, trace the radar all the way around the perimeter of the house. Most of the time the tanks are going to be close to the house. They're going to roll all around the house. They use their other, I don't understand all their equipment, but they use all their technology they have to search the areas where the tanks are most likely to be. And they can write some kind of letter if they didn't find the evidence of the tank. They will not write you something guaranteeing there's no tank there. they will write you a letter that, they searched everywhere they could using the equipment they have, and, they find evidence of a tank, and I'm gonna guarantee you there's not one. But that's normally what we do if we can't find the tank from our inspection. We'll just, line those guys up for you and let you go direct with them to get that taken care of. I guess another thing I should, mention as far as doing all the paperwork with the state, the certified letters, the document has to be, recorded with the register of deeds, all the notification forms, supervision. Normally that's in the neighborhood of about $1,000. Then that's the part that Paragon would actually handle. So I think I made reference at some point to the seller looking at about a $2,000 cost, and that was the figure. $2,000 or so for the tank itself, $1,000 for the paperwork. So that's ultimately what the seller is going to be facing on a typical site. And here again, that's not a tank that's underneath the driveway or inaccessible to be filled, not under a crawl space, but on your typical site with a tank out in the middle of the yard, just underneath some shrubbery or something.
So your company, Paragon, are environmental consultants, and so does that mean you deal with other items other than just storage tanks? What else are your services?
Basically everything we do has got to do with some kind of petroleum contamination. So we do service station, industrial type work, commercial tank, but almost everything we do is either a tank or it's got somehow related to petroleum, like a spill or something like that. So, we've got some people we work with that, if you need an asbestos inspection, we get called for that all the time, radon and paint, all that kind of thing. We've got some people that we can refer you to for that, but I wouldn't know anything more about that than you guys probably know, other than maybe who to call. So call us, we'll try to get you the right person, but it's not going to be me.
If you're out in the county and somebody had an actual buried gasoline tank or diesel tank for the farm equipment, how quickly does that stuff dissipate in the soil? Is it the same as the heating oil, or?
Well, the gasoline will take longer typically if it spreads quicker. It's a much more mobile fuel. And because of that, the situation Tom's describing, if you've got a farm tank or any other kind of non-regulated or residential fuel tank, which, we do find houses where they had a gasoline tank for some reason, maybe they should fuel mowers or, tractors, that kind of thing. That basically falls under the same stipulation as a non-regulated tank of home heating oil. So that would be the same situation. Really, the only thing that's different on that is if you're dealing with gasoline, because it does have a tendency to spread more. Basically, the radius for that with the supply well is not going to be 150 feet; it's going to be 300 feet. The state basically says we know this contamination can spread quicker. It's got the potential to migrate further, so we're going to up the radius.
Sure.
But most, here again, to be honest, most of the sites where you find these, non-regulated farm fuel tanks are probably in the county area where you got a well anyway. So.
Did you go over the price of this? I even know the location price, or the price of the actual inspection.
It's normally like $150.
Oh, it is.
$100 to $150.
Is that for the full test?
Yeah, that's including the $50 analysis. Basically, it's just $100 to come out and do whatever we need to do, and then if we collect the sample, it'd be the other $50 for the analysis.
Okay, and then it's about the same price to get the for the locate, right? So,
correct, but if we hired them to come out and locate it, and they found the tank, then we're going to need to come back out and actually do the testing at that point. So you basically be looking at
maybe like 300.
be looking at roughly 150 for them, 150 for us. We're charging you for 2 visits, but.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear on that.
Yeah, normally, that's another reason. If you're on the buyer's side, there's really no reason, not to get this thing checked out. It's really, nobody wants to throw away $150, but we're trying to do that just as cheaply as possible because, the buyer really needs to do this. It's not something you want to take a gamble on and, not have the inspection done. It's probably going to come back and bite you.
How deep is the top of the tank from the soil generally?
Normally the residential tanks are, well, I shouldn't say normally because we find some that are not buried at all. They're barely below the ground. But typically they're anywhere from 12 inches to about 36 inches.
Okay.
And I should have said too, the typical size, most of the time you're going to find in a residence, it's going to either be a 275 gallon tank, which is about 3 feet diameter, about 5 feet long, or it's going to be a 550 gallon tank, which is about 3.5 feet diameter, about 6.5 feet long. So that's the typical size you're looking at. If you're talking about a 550 buried, 3 feet deep, well, the contamination may not start at 5 or 6 feet deep in the ground because the tank bottom is going to be, deeper than 6 feet. So, and that's why on the inspection, you get down and sample beneath the bottom. You're not trying to, you don't want to take a sample 3 feet deep if that's not even to the top of the tank. That's not telling you anything.
What was the second gallon? 275 gallons.
The 275, and that's 3 foot by 5 foot diameter. The other one's a 550 gallon, and that's 3.5 by about 6.5. There are a fair number of residents as you start to get to your bigger homes. You start to get sometimes a 1,000-gallon tank or even bigger. But most of the residential properties have a 550 or smaller.
If there's an oil tank in a basement and it's above ground, but it's in the basement or in the crawl space, can your guys come out and remove those?
Yeah, a lot of times, what we do on the inspections, normally for the above ground tanks, we don't normally analyze the sample at the lab. We do a visual inspection on those typically because you can see what you're dealing with. You can see the oil stain. That's kind of the theory too with the state is they're not expecting those releases to be nearly as bad because they're kind of assuming somebody's going to see that it's leaking and do something about it. We still have a lot of those where the buyer or the lender wants that tank removed. We've had to have our contractor take them out of, very tight crawl spaces. I mean, half the clearance that you have on one of these tables, and they're crawling into there, cutting that thing into 25 pieces and, passing it out through a foundation bin. So, I mean, anything can be done. It's just obviously that's not a cheap job. Another thing, I'm kind of glad you brought up about the AFCs. Another thing to be cautious of, and we run into this a lot, if you don't really think about it, if you get a site where you're dealing with an above-ground tank, you see an above-ground, but there's also an underground tank at the site, and that's much more common than you would think. That means that almost certainly the underground tank's leaking, because what happened is the underground tank started taking out water and went bad, which if it's taking out water also means it was leaking. The oil company didn't tell them anything about the tank leaking. They just said, let us spot you a new tank, you'll be good to go. They came out and set a new above-ground tank right on top of it, switched the lines over. They continue to use oil heat, but the whole time the underground tank was leaking. So if you find a site with multiple tanks, whether it be two buried tanks or one buried and one above ground, you can almost guarantee that original tank was leaking, and that's the reason. They would have never put a second one in there if they weren't having problems with the first one. So we run into that a lot. People will call us and they'll start telling us all the scenario. We need you to inspect this tank. Come out and look at this. Oh, by the way, you'll know where to see it because it's sitting right beside the above ground tank. So, we'll still come out and inspect it, but I can tell you that the underground tank's leaking because of the above ground tank. So that's another thing to look out for. You're going to certainly know that there's almost a guarantee that there's a problem with that original tank.
So is there any concept of something, if it's that type of situation where it's an above ground because the one under was leaking and then any recourse for the oil company at that point?
I don't know what you would do. I don't know. They were doing anything wrong. People probably didn't ask, is my tank leaking? They just said, oh, my tank's not working. What do I need to do? And they just said, well, we'll get you a new tank set up and you'll be good. It's hard to know what was said, 20 years ago when that was done. But the oil companies are pretty careful. I mean, they're careful enough that all these tanks are, even though they've been filling them for 25 or 30 years, they didn't own any of them. The homeowner was responsible for the tank. So I'm sure it's the same thing. They've got no liability. They've got this stuff covered. Anything else?
We do appreciate you coming out. So thank you.